What's good, everybody? We are back with another Call of Duty mobile video. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day today. So, as most of you probably know, in the recent update, we had a couple new weapons added to the game, as well as a lot of weapons added over the past few months. And a long time ago, I think back during Season 1 of Call of Duty Mobile, one of my most popular videos was ranking every weapon in Call of Duty Mobile. So I wanted to do an updated version of this for you guys just to kind of give you a perspective on where all the different weapons compare to each other. Now, obviously, I'm not a pro player, but I've used pretty much all these weapons to a pretty good extent and have a pretty good feel for how they play out in the game, especially with all the recent balance changes and everything happening in the game. So if you guys do enjoy the video, make sure you drop a like down below and also subscribe to the squad if you guys haven't already. I'm also going to have the tier list maker that I'm using for this down in the description. So if you guys want to make your own tier list and share it with me on Instagram or Twitter, I would love to see what you guys' opinions are on all the guns in Call of Duty Mobile. Without any more talking, we're going to go ahead and hop into it. So basically, we've got every gun in Call of Duty Mobile that can be obtained freely. So keep in mind, there's a few guns on here, or rather a few guns that are not on here, such as the KRM shotgun and the HBR. Those guns are not obtainable for free, so I didn't put them on here for obvious reasons. I wanted this to be a completely free-to-play list, so even though there might be paid skins on here, all the guns that are on here are obtainable for free. So getting started, we got the AK-117. Now, this is a gun that's been really dominant basically throughout all of Call of Duty Mobile. It didn't receive any nerfs in the past update, and because of that, it's actually one of the top assault rifles right now. So I'm struggling to decide whether or not it would go in the S or A class, and I think just because it lacks the super high rate of fire or damage output to be a really good weapon, I don't think I can put it in the S class just because of how OP some of the weapons on this list are, but I'll definitely put it in the A class. Probably the same for the AK-47. It's another one of those weapons that has consistently been a really good option, has good damage output, but not quite on the level that it needs to be in order to be an absolutely dominant weapon. Next up, we got the RUS-79U, formerly the AKS-74U. In my opinion, this is probably a top 3 weapon in the game right now, simply because of the combination of mobility, range, and damage that it has, especially with the nerf of the MSMC in the recent update. I think the RUS is actually going to be the best SMG in the game right now, and because of that, obviously, I have to put it in S tier. There are definitely some weapons giving it competition, and I know right now people are kind of riding the hype train of the GKS, and some people might argue that the GKS is better, but it just can't match the damage output of the RUS-79U. So even though it might have a little bit better stability, with two people of equal skill level using both weapons, I believe the RUS-79U will win the majority of the time. Next up, we got the Arctic 50. This is a weapon that honestly I think still needs to be nerfed. It's got a really big lethal zone and still a crazy fast rate of fire. So this is not a weapon that I like to use just because I don't like the scope animation and the fact that the lethal zone is slightly smaller than the DLQ. But regardless, it's absolutely an S tier weapon because it's honestly pretty broken and probably needs a nerf. Then next up, we've got the ASM-10, which most people would probably say is the best gun in Call of Duty Mobile right now, and I would definitely agree with them. The combination of stability and also the pretty sizable 3-shot range that this gun has makes it pretty broken and really overpowered. They actually nerfed it too much in the recent update, and because of that, I'm going to be putting it up in the S class. Next up, we got the BK-57. This is another one of those guns that's been really consistent throughout all of Call of Duty Mobile, but just not quite where it needs to be in regards to damage output in order to be in the A class, but it's a decent option if you are looking to have fun. Then we got the Buy 15. Now, previously, I had shotguns as all of my lowest rated guns in Call of Duty Mobile. The Buy 15 actually has decent range, and because of how quickly it can one-shot, I'm going to put it in the B category. I'm almost tempted to put it in the A category, but obviously the massive lack of range makes it pretty difficult to use on any sizable map. So because of that, I've got it in B, but It's actually a decent option and something you should try out if you haven't recently. Next, we got the Chickum. Personally, I hate the Chickum, but I know there's a lot of people that are actually decent with the weapon. That being said, it doesn't really have the consistency, rate of fire, or range to be considered a B tier weapon, but just because there are some weapons on this list that are absolutely terrible, I'm not going to put the Chickum down as a D tier weapon just because it is an option, and I think in the hands of a right player, it could actually be consistently good. Next, we got a DLQ, which I'm going to be putting in S tier as well. So as you guys probably know, if you watch my streams or videos, this is my favorite sniper in the game as the largest lethal zone. And even though it doesn't have the rate of fire that the Arctic 50 has, it is the choice of most pro players who snipe in Call of Duty Mobile. Because of that, obviously, I got to put it in the S tier. And while obviously a lot of this is based off of preference, in my opinion, this is the best sniper in Call of Duty Mobile just because of how big the lethal zone is. Next up, we got the HG40, which I'm also going to be considering a C tier gun. It's a fun gun to use, but for an SMG, it just doesn't have a fast enough rate of fire to be considered a decent option, and because of that, I'm going to have to throw it into the C tier. Then we have the HS0405 shotgun. In my opinion, this might actually be the worst shotgun in the game. I believe it has the slowest rate of fire of any shotgun, and yet for some reason, it has absolutely terrible range. The Buy 15 is by far a better option, so if you are looking to try out shotguns, I don't recommend this one. I would definitely recommend the Buy 15. And then we also have the HS2126 burst shotgun, also one of the worst weapons in the game, absolutely a D tier weapon that I would not recommend using at all. Then after that, we got the LK24. Now, a lot of people have been hyping this gun up a lot, and it did get a slight buff in the recent update, but I think the main factor going into people's hype is just the fact that it wasn't nerfed like a lot of the top tier weapons were. I'm kind of struggling between whether or not to put this in A or B tier, and I think just because it has a pretty low rate of fire, but at the same time is not able to 3-tap at really any range, I'm gonna have to put it in the B tier. It's a decent weapon, but not one that, in my opinion, can make it up to that A tier status. Next up, we've got the M16. Now, this is kind of a controversial one, just because in past seasons, I've rated this as one of the worst weapons in the game. But when you look at it statistically, it's actually really, really good, especially if you're able to hit your shots. So obviously that's true of most weapons, but especially of this one. If you are accurate enough, you can actually one burst with this gun very, very far away. Okay, not really very far away, but at similar range to that of the ASM-10. And because it's a burst fire weapon, the shots come out at a really fast rate. So if you're able to one burst people, this gun is really, really good. But at the same time, burst fire is sometimes difficult to control. So while I can't put it at S tier, I actually am going to put it at A tier simply because of how quickly you can kill people if you're able to hit those one burst shots. Next up, we do have the M21 EBR. That's going to be another one of those D tier weapons. I will put it above the shotguns, but really any sniper rifle that is not able to one tap at really any location of the body is just not going to be able to be a viable weapon. Yeah, it might be fun to troll around with in a game of TDM or something like that, but it really just isn't going to make the cut. Next, we got the M4 LMG, and I'm actually tempted to put this in the D tier. I'm not going to, simply because it is possible to be used, and I have seen one or two people use it, but it just has low rate of fire, it has low damage, it has high recoil. There's not really anything good about it, and the only advantage is that it has a decent enough rate of fire that you'll probably be able to win some gunfights, but not at a consistent rate. Next up, we do have the M4. This is a gun that has a super low rate of fire, but also it has really good stability. And because of that, it does make it into the B tier for me. Now, I actually am going to put it below the majority of the other options in the B tier because, in my opinion, it just doesn't have the damage output to make the cut. But we've actually seen some pro players start to use this in scrims just because of how stable it is, and also because it does have a decent rate of fire and definitely could be a viable option. Next, we got the MSMC, which previously probably was considered to be an S tier weapon. Right now, I would say it's probably A tier just because of the recent decrease in damage output, and also increase in recoil makes it really difficult to use. It is still a good gun, but really outside of 10 to 15 meters, you're going to lose the majority of your gunfight. gunfights, and you're not going to see a whole lot of people using this in ranked anymore just because the nerfs to it were so high. Then we got the PDW-57. I'm going to consider this to be another B tier weapon, and honestly bordering on C tier. Has a really good size mag, and because of that, it definitely is an option, but if you're in a head-to-head gunfight against most other SMGs outside of the Chickum and the HG40, you're probably going to lose that gunfight. So if you hit your shots, like I said with some of the other guns, it can be a decent option, and obviously the 50 ammo clip is a nice little addition, but it's just not quite making the cut for an A tier weapon. Next up, we got the RPD. Now, most LMGs I'm going to be putting in C tier. Mobility is just such a big factor in Call of Duty Mobile that it's difficult for me to justify putting any of them up into the S or A tiers, simply because unless it has ridiculous damage output and range like the S36 had up until this season, you just can't justify using it, especially at a competitive level. I am going to put the S36 in B tier because even though it did receive a really big nerf in the past season, it still does really high damage and has a high rate of fire. So in mid to close range, it's still a decent option. You'll see people use this every once in a while, but because of the pretty significant increase in recoil, it's not really usable at long range like most LMGs are. Then next up, we got the Striker shotgun. This is another one of those terrible shotguns that unless you're right on top of somebody, you're just going to have a really tough time getting kills. Because of that, it is going to go down into D tier for me. Then we got the Type 25, which has received nerfs over the past few seasons. I would say this season's nerf is the first one that actually made a difference in the performance of the gun. So while it's no longer an S tier weapon, I am still going to consider it A tier because it does have a really good rate of fire, slightly lower damage than it has had in the past, and a pretty good amount of recoil, but still definitely a decent option and can be used by really any good player. Next, we got the UL-736, which a lot of people thought was going to be the new S36 this season. It really isn't. The damage on it just isn't high enough to be that. And also, it does have a pretty significant amount of horizontal recoil that prevents it from being a top option. Then we got the XPR, very similar to the M21 EBR. One of those weapons that it just can't be anywhere above D tier because of the slow rate of fire, and it doesn't have any one-tap lethal zones. Now we're probably getting to the part of this list that most people were interested to hear about because these are the newer weapons in the game. So first up, we do have the GKS, a new SMG in Call of Duty Mobile. I know a lot of people like this, and it's definitely a really good option because it is a super stable weapon. It has good but not great damage output. So obviously, like most of the weapons on this list, if you hit your shots, then you can win a gunfight, but there's a pretty good amount of weapons that can out damage it, and because of that, I have a tough time putting it up into the A tier. I'm going to put it close to the top of the B tier, but I just can't justify putting it up here with any of these A tier weapons simply because the damage output isn't where it needs to be in order to match up with those guys. Then we got the HVK Eruption. This is a fun gun to use, but it really isn't that good unless you're at like a very specific range. I would say close medium range is where this weapon really shines because it has a crazy high rate of fire for an assault rifle, but it has a lot of damage drop off. And also, if you get to the super close range, it doesn't have the mobility that you need in order to be able to match up with most SMGs. Because of that, I have it in the B tier, and yes, it is fun to use. But whenever you're in those close range gunfights, you want to have that SMG mobility that you just don't have because this is an assault rifle, and because of that, I'm going to have to put it in B tier. Next up, we've got the ICR, which is obtainable for free in the credit store. I consider this to be a C tier weapon, even though it did receive a buff in the recent season. It wasn't enough of a buff to really make a difference in my eyes. It just has a crazy low damage output, probably lower than the M4 or somewhat close to it, and it also has higher recoil than the M4 is. So because of that, I do have that down in the C tier. Then we've got the KN-44. Now, this is a gun that was considered to be one of the top weapons, and with the nerf of the Type 25 and a bunch of other major weapons, I am going to consider this to be an A tier weapon. Now, keep in mind, this gun specializes in long-range gunfights, so at close range, you are going to struggle to win, but because of the high damage at long ranges, it's definitely a good option, and we've seen a lot of pro players using this, especially as of late. But it also does have a decent amount of horizontal recoil that you're going to have to keep in mind when using it. After that, we've got the Locus, which was obtainable last season as a rank reward. So this one I'm going to put up in the A tier. It definitely doesn't match up with the other sniper rifles simply because it has a smaller lethal zone than the DL has, but it also has a slower rate of fire than the Arctic 50 has, and I believe it actually received more of a nerf in the past update than either of the other two. Obviously, as a bolt-action sniper, it's still going to be an option for some top players, but in my opinion, it's not good enough to be considered an S-class gun. And then lastly, we've got the Man of War, and I might get some flack on this and some people might disagree, but I'm actually going to consider this to be an S-class gun for this season, simply because it has pretty similar damage to the ASM-10. Now keep in mind, it has significantly more recoil, but in my opinion, the recoil is easier to predict than the ASM-10, and because of that, I would consider this to be an S-class gun. It has a really tight hipfire spread too, which in my opinion makes it especially good. And obviously there is a learning curve to using it because it does have that pretty significant recoil, but even though it looks like a really big gun, it actually has decent mobility too. So in my opinion, this is going to be one of the top assault rifles in Season 4 of Call of Duty Mobile, and definitely something that you should try out whenever you do hit Master 1 and are able to get this skin for free. So that's going to be it for our ranks for all the weapons in Call of Duty Mobile. Hope you guys did enjoy the video. Feel free to let me know if you agree, disagree, anything else down in the comments. If you do disagree, that's fine. Feel free to let me know why. But that's going to be it for the video. Hope you guys did enjoy. Drop a like if you did. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys next time.